What is up, everybody? Welcome to the premiere episode of COD Talks. I am your host, Furs95, and this is the podcast for all things competitive Call of Duty related. So first and foremost, just wanted to introduce myself briefly. I am Furs95, like I said. I am a very, very passionate competitive Call of Duty fan. I've been passionate about the scene ever since Black Ops 1 when I first started following it and watching competitive Call of Duty tournaments. And I've been a fan of just the series as a whole ever since Call of Duty 2. I've bought in every COD since COD 2. I'm just a huge fan of the franchise as a whole. And I thought, I've had this idea of doing a competitive Call of Duty podcast for a while now. And I basically just said, fuck it. Let's do it. Worst case, I just get to talk about competitive Call of Duty for an hour. So without further ado, let me talk about how the format's going to go. And like I said, guys, let me just preface by saying I am really open to constructive criticism. I really want to make this podcast the best that it can be. And I will do anything in my power to make it so. And so please, guys, just rain it on me. Let me know what I'm doing wrong. Let me know what I'm doing right. And just, hopefully I'll have guests on this show in the future. But for now, you just get me. Please, guys, just let me know what I'm doing wrong, what I'm doing right, what things you want me to talk about, different segments I can introduce. But for now, basically the format that I'm going to go by for now is the first half of the podcast is basically just going to be up-to-date current news that is going on within the competitive COD scene. And then the second half is going to be kind of more general topics about competitive Call of Duty, things that might not be so, up to date, but just kind of general topics such as, what makes a good competitive Call of Duty, things of that nature. So without further ado, let's dive into the news for the week. So this week, as some of you guys probably know, the Division B of the Pro League kicks off today at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the teams in Division B, let me go down the list real quick, are Luminosity Gaming, E-United, FaZe, Envious, Evil Geniuses, Splice, Unilad, and Epsilon. So, just sort of initial thoughts on this division. This is going to be a bloodbath of division. There's no doubt about it. I mean, this division, I would argue this division is a little more sort of evenly spread out in terms of competition than Division A was. I look at this division, I mean, really, there are 6 teams in this division that absolutely could come out number one in this division. There's no doubt in my mind. I don't know if I could have said that for Division A. And some of you might, I think in those 6 teams are probably the top 6 teams that I just read. LG, EU, FaZe, Envy, EG, and Splice, I think all have a great shot at winning this division. Now that brings me to another news topic that I know is rather unfortunate, which is Jerd, the player for Splice, as many of you know. He is having trouble getting into the country, unfortunately. I think due to visa issues. I don't know what the latest on that is. I think it looks like, I know Felony is going to replace him for the time being. Hopefully Jerd can get here as fast as possible. It would really suck for Splice if they had to go through, the entire week or the entire 2 weeks, with Felony. No disrespect to Felony or anything, but it's just, obviously he's not part of this team. They don't have the chemistry that they do with Jerd. And without it needing to be said, really, Jerd is a phenomenal player. I mean, he is Europe's best submachine gun player. There's no question about it. He's one of the best submachine gun players in the world. I mean, he's been phenomenal these past several COD titles. So, hoping Splice can get that sorted out because I think Splice with Jerd absolutely has the potential to win this division. I think Splice without Jerd, I'm going to say they still have potential to win this division. I know that's probably a little controversial, but, the core 3 of this team in Bance, Mad Cat, and Tommy, that's a really strong core 3. That's, Europe's finest right there, in my opinion, aside from maybe some of the guys from Red Reserve who we had some major success in Division 1. But back on topic, I still think Splice, even with Felony, has a shot at winning this division. I will be at a much lesser shot, but I still think they have a shot. And, this division, it's tough. It's tough to pick a winner. I am going to run down my predictions though for this division on who's going to place where, just to see what your guys' thoughts are. It's really hard to predict, not just this division, but really Call of Duty in general. Call of Duty is such a day-to-day game. It's kind of just all about who comes out and executes. I mean, that's really the name of the game. As a lot of you guys are aware, it's just who comes out and who executes. But with that being said, I am going to run through my predictions here. So finishing last, I got to give it to Unilad. I've watched a few Unilad games, and they've shown flashes of really quality gameplay, but I don't know if they're going to be able to consistently bring it day in and day out like you need to in the format that Pro League is in. And I just have my doubts about Unilad. Second, I got Epsilon. Epsilon is another team that has been a little disappointing to me. I think that led by Dave, who's a phenomenal player, I expected a little more out of them. They've had a kind of a rough start to this World War II season. Maybe they'll surprise me. Maybe they'll actually play to their potential. But for now, I got them placing 7th. Sixth, I'm gonna have to give it to EG, and this breaks my heart because I love this EG roster. I don't want to say I'm an Aches fan because I got to preface this, guys. I am an Optic fan. I do bleed green, but I am a competitive COD fan first and foremost. Optic fan second. So I love Aches. I think Aches he's just been such a pinnacle in competitive Call of Duty. He's got a great, he's got a great mind for the game. Obviously, he's had so much success. He's one of the winningest players of all time. He's got a great, he's not afraid. He loves competitive Call of Duty. He loves the scene. He's not afraid to voice his opinion. He's not afraid to criticize things when he sees that they need criticism. And that's why I have so much admiration for Aches just as a player and as an individual and all he's done for competitive Call of Duty. But with that being said, this EG team, I don't know. They're a tough team to read. I love the roster. I love all these players, but they haven't quite pieced it together in World War II yet. And I know it was a big relief for them even qualifying for Pro League. They was in serious doubt going into New Orleans whether or not this team was even going to qualify. And, I think they're just clearly, obviously happy to even be here. I'm not quite sold yet. I haven't seen anything from this team so far that would lead me to believe that they really can compete day in and day out again against these top teams in this division. There's no doubt in my mind that they'll come out and be competitive in virtually every map. In every match. They've taken, I think they've been to multiple Game 5s with United already. So there's no question that this team has the potential, but, actually executing and potential are two different things. And I think, this EG team, I think they've been a little too inconsistent, and I got them finishing 6th. And, finishing 5th, I have Envy. Envy, this is a team that has been definitely underwhelming, to say the least, so far in this World War II season. This was a questionable roster formation, I would say, for many of us in the competitive Call of Duty scene when it was first announced. The previous Envy roster had seen a lot of success, even winning. They were world champs back in Black Ops 3. And, Hastro, the owner of Envious, he gave Slasher, clearly was free reign for him to do basically whatever he wanted with this roster. And this is what he wanted. This is the roster he wanted, clearly. And they have not had a ton of success so far in World War II, which, to be honest, I'm a little surprised with. This was a roster that, like I said earlier, that people had doubts about, but I thought this team on paper was pretty talented. I think Hook in particular is an incredibly talented individual. He's obviously a player that had a lot of success back in the Advanced Warfare days, back in the Advanced Warfare season. And, he was a player that everyone was like, oh, this guy's, he's up and coming. He's the next Scump. He's got it, right? And I was one of those people. There's no doubt. I was like, this guy's here to stay. He's a force to be reckoned with. And then, unfortunately, he had to move over to Halo due to age restrictions. And he had a ton of success over in the Halo scene, too. I mean, he was on a top 2 team for a lot of his time in the Halo scene. And so there's no doubt that Hook is an incredibly talented individual. And I don't think we've seen everything he has to offer yet. I think he has yet to really reach his ceiling in this game. I think he's not even close to reaching his ceiling in this game thus far. And I'm expecting Hook in particular to have a really good Pro League. I think he's a player that once he figures out the game, he's going to be a force to reckon with. And I think this week, I think, is when Hook is going to find his stride. And I think this Envy, but unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be enough. I think this Envy roster as a whole really relies on Slasher to just go off. And while Slasher is a phenomenal player, and I do believe Hook is going to have a good week, I think that there's just not enough from the other two. I think Classic in particular has been pretty underwhelming so far. I think Classic is a guy that, he's had a lot of success in past titles, but I think most of his success came in jetpack CODs. And, I don't want to call him a jetpack or anything, but, he's been around the scene for a while, and he's definitely a veteran, but he hasn't impressed me too much so far up to this point. I think that it's just this NV team has just been underwhelming in slaying in particular. Their hard point has been abysmal, which is, surprising with this roster. I think that, it's just, I haven't seen enough. From this team, and I don't know if I'm going to see enough this week to make me believe that they're going to place any higher. So I got NVS at 5th. 4th, I have Splice. Like I said, I think this team, it's unfortunate. Even with Jerd out, I have this team at 4th, which is a little bold. I'm not going to lie. That's a little bold of me. But, I think the core 3 of this team is just too talented. And I think they're a team that they're also a bunch of veterans. Mad Cat's been around the scene forever. Tommy and Bance as well. So, I think that this is a squad that, despite Jerd potentially not being there for this first week or maybe the full 2 weeks, we'll see. But I still think they're going to get it done. I still think they're going to surprise a few people with this team and with Felony. I think Felony is a guy that, I think Felony is a bit underestimated sometimes. I think he's a guy that has a lot of talent. He's definitely been inconsistent. There's no denying that up to this point in World War II. But I think he's a guy that, I think he's gonna turn some heads this week. I'm interested to see the Splice team because I think they're gonna turn some heads and surprise people even without having Jerd. So I got them at 4th. At 3rd, I have FaZe. This FaZe roster, it's an interesting one. People didn't expect much coming into the season when this team was first announced, and they've already surprised the hell out of a lot of us with the success that they've had up to this point. And I think a lot of that's really due to replays. Replays has been really strong in this game so far, much stronger than I think myself or hardly any of us imagined. He's been really, really good. And I think he's a guy that not only is he a really good player in game, obviously, but he offers a lot to a team. He's a very good communicator. If you've ever listened to FaZe scrim or anything, you can tell Replays he really, really knows how to communicate things effectively to his teammates in game modes that really require it, which is obviously all through game modes, but in game modes like CTF, he's really good about recognizing who's down and who's up spawn and who still needs to who still hasn't died yet and things of that nature. So he's a really great leader. I think he's the leader that this team needs, and I think FaZe's success has largely, been due to replays. I don't want to discredit the other 3 players because I think Priesta, Attach, and Zuma have all been very good up to this point in the game as well. But I think this team thrives off of replays leadership, and I have them finishing 3rd. Next team I have is E United. I have them finishing 2nd. This team, I like this roster a lot. I think this is another one kind of similar to FaZe in that they have a really great veteran leader in Clayster, and then mix that with a bunch of young talent in Priesta, in Arcides, Pristini, and Silly. And I think this roster, we've seen flashes of brilliance from this team time and time again. I mean, there's no doubt this team has the ability to win tournaments and to win LAN events and to compete with the best teams out there. This team, though, they haven't quite gotten over that hump, though. They haven't quite gotten over that hump, specifically in World War II. They've come really close to taking down teams like LG. I think they have taken LG in best of 5 at some point this year, but they haven't quite gotten over that hump yet. And, I think they're going to come close this week. I think they're going to come out and compete and do really well, but I just don't quite have them getting over that hump and finishing 1st in the division. That's why I have them at 2nd. At 1st, I have LG. This team has been very successful thus far in World War II. And they're another team that I think you could argue they haven't quite made over that hump. They haven't won any tournaments yet, but we've only had 2. Well, we've had 3 technically, I guess. LG was able to win that Northern Arena tournament, which was, I know, controversial, but, there was still good competition at the tournament, so you can't discredit them too much from that. And I have them finishing 1st. I think they're a team that is has the best chance of being consistent in this division. I think all the other teams are obviously great teams, but they are not quite as consistent as this LG roster I think has the potential to be. And that's the biggest thing with Pro League, right? Is you got to be consistent. You got to bring it day in and day out, because you're playing 3 times a week. It's not like in a tournament format where you can be off on Friday and play okay Saturday and just go off Sunday and win the event. You really have to bring it day in and day out in Pro League to be successful and to finish on top of your division. And that's what I expect from this LG roster. I think that they still haven't quite hit their ceiling in this game, and I think you're gonna see a lot of improvement from this LG roster, and they're gonna bring it this week and next week in this Division B Pro League. Alrighty, so with that said, that's basically all the news I want to talk about for now. That is current news within the competitive COD scene. So with that said, I'm going to flip over to just sort of my general discussion part of the podcast. And my first topic is I just kind of wanted to dive into my general thoughts on World War II as a game, as a competitive COD game. And this is something I could talk for days about, but I'm going to try and just kind of be as concise as I can. This World War II game, so far, I'm going to make a claim that I know, some people aren't going to agree with, and that's perfectly fine. But I think this is absolutely the best competitive Call of Duty we've had since Black Ops 2. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, it doesn't really need to be said, but we're back to boots on the ground. And I realize that some of you might not have been the biggest fans of jetpack games. I certainly wasn't in terms of competitive Call of Duty specifically. I actually was a big fan of Advanced Warfare and even Black Ops 3 to a more extent. I really liked Black Ops 3, but I think in the end, Call of Duty belongs on boots on the ground. There's just no doubt in my mind, especially from a competitive standpoint. I think jetpacks added a lot of randomness, a lot of chaotic, hectic gameplay that we didn't need. I mean, competitive Call of Duty is already a fast game. I mean, Hardpoint moves incredibly fast. CTF's a fast game, and the game already moves fast enough on boots on the ground. And I think jetpacks just exponentiated that problem, or that trait, and it was kind of to a negative. So I think that's the first point I would make, is that we're back to boots on the ground. And kind of with that point is that there's no more specialists. And I think specialists were probably the biggest problem, maybe not the biggest, but it was certainly one of the biggest problems I had with the previous 2 COD installments, both in Infinite Warfare and Black Ops 3. Specialists, they added an extra layer that I thought took very minimal skill. Turning yourself invisible and flanking the enemy team and shooting all 4 of them in the back doesn't take a whole lot of skill, let's be honest. So I'm really glad that we don't have specialists anymore. I think they just were kind of a detriment. I know some people would argue that they were a good from a viewer's perspective. And yeah, there were some cool plays, like, Scump made some pretty cool plays with the kinetic armor, and guys made cool plays with camo and this and that. But it's like, in the end, I just don't think it was good for the scene. I don't think it was good for competitive integrity. So that's point 2 I would make, is that, we're back to boots on the ground, no specialists. We're back to, classic Call of Duty. And so the next point I guess I want to bring up with World War II is that I think this game, it's had a rough start. I think just from a general viewpoint, not just competitive related, but just from the pub community has just been in uproar about this game ever since it's been released. And I think a lot of it's justified, some of it's not, but I think that overall, this game, it's had a rough start. There's no doubt in my mind. There's a lot of issues that this game had that they finally got around to, with the most recent updates, such as the spectator glitch, this and that, things of that nature. And it's been rough from just kind of a general standpoint, but from a competitive standpoint, I think we're off to a pretty good start, to be honest. I think the only major missed opportunity, in my opinion, would be the lack of streams for the 2Ks. I think that was a missed opportunity on MLG's part. But that's not a huge issue. It was an issue, and I think it would have helped with exposure. But we're past that. We're beyond that. We're to the point where 2Ks are significantly less important now that we've had a few LAN events and the Pro League starting. So you look at the start of this year. So I think there's no doubt this game has moved the needle in terms of just competitive Call of Duty as a whole. You know, we had game battles integration right off the get-go. And I know that there were problems with it, and, you know, it wasn't perfect, but, you know, this is the first Call of Duty we've ever had a game battles feature right from the get-go integrated into the game. I think that's, you know, that's something people take for granted. I think it's a really good, you know, hats off to Sledgehammer. I know that, you know, that was first introduced in Infinite Warfare, but I think Sledgehammer's, you know, we got to give credit where credit's due. And I think that Sledgehammer does deserve credit for a lot of the things they've done right off the get-go for this game in terms of competitive. I think another area I want to touch on is sort of the format of this season and how MLG has laid out how the CWL events will go. And I think by far this is the best year we've ever had in terms of you know, a structured, you know, format. We've already had a ton of action. I mean, all the 2Ks that, you know, I know it was unfortunate, like I touched on earlier, you know, MLG wasn't able to stream them, but there were pros that were streaming them to in some, you know, in some capacity at least. So, you know, that was actually action to watch. I think the first two LAN events were both great. You know, MLG has consistently been stepping it up ever since I started watching way back in Black Ops 1 in terms of production value. You know, there's no doubt about it. The first two events have been action-packed, fun, great events to watch. And then, you know, leading up to the COD Pro League, I think that we haven't had a whole lot of downtime, except for over the holidays, which I think was kind of justified. You know, it's like you can't really force players to play over Christmas and New Year's break. I mean, it's just like that's a downtime for virtually everyone. So I think MLG's done a pretty good job with how they've structured this year in terms of events and tournaments and things of that nature. So, you know, I think that COD is in a good spot in terms of who we have, you know, organizing our events. I think we have a company that is passionate about the scene and really does care about us, which is always a good thing. We talk about it all the time, but, you know, I know the subreddit discusses this a lot, but I think that, you know, myself and many of us, we do want to see more from the developer side. We want to see more from the publisher side. And that's kind of brings me into my next topic, which is advertising. I know this was a hot topic on the sort of lack of advertising that the Pro League had, which was unfortunate. I mean, there's nothing more that needs to be said. It was just unfortunate. There was just simply not enough advertising. There's no doubt about it, both on MLG's part, on Activision's part, on Sledgehammer's part. And yes, this is not just on MLG. You look at other successful esport games, and they have in-game promotion going on all the time. You know, Counter-Strike does for all the time. Overwatch does. This is something that COD needs to do, and this comes from the developers and the publishers. This isn't, you know, MLG can only do so much. You know, developers, you know, I will give, once again, I want to give credit where credit's due for Sledgehammer. You know, I know that they had, for New Orleans, they had, you know, a supply drop if you tuned into CWL NOLA, which is good to see, but I want more of that. I want more of that type of stuff. I don't think that's, you know, unfair to ask for. I think it's perfectly fair. I mean, this is their game, and, you know, keeping the community involved is really important. And I think that, you know, Sledgehammer, it can do a better job. They can do a better job. There's no doubt about it. You know, I don't think it's asking too much to, you know, expand upon what they started with CWL NOLA. I think that, you know, a supply drop for every 30 minutes you're watching or this and that, you know, little things like that. There's so many little things that so many people have pointed out, things like supply drops, things like, you know, consistently tweeting out the streams, you know, just advertising, just making commercials, you know, little things that give us exposure, right? And because I really do think that World War II is an entertaining game to watch from a competitive standpoint. I know, like I said, I think that, you know, from a competitive standpoint, it's clear, in my opinion, it's pretty clearly the best one since Black Ops 2. I mean, in my opinion, the jetpack games are disqualified because they have jetpacks. I mean, you know, this game, I think, has been underwhelming in certain areas and pretty good in others. I think the most underwhelming part of World War II so far has clearly been the maps. I think from a competitive standpoint, I was expecting, you know, the maps in this game, they're not great. but they're not terrible either. I think the only truly awful map in the rotation right now is Gibraltar Hardpoint. I mean, that map is just abysmal in terms of spawns. There's no doubt about it. But all the other maps, I think play relatively well. I know St. Marie has been a controversial, but I think the little spawn tweak they did helped that map a lot. I've played the map a good bit since they tweaked the spawns, and I think that the map is back to being defensive favored, which is how it's supposed to work in S&D. And I think the maps, like I said, the problem with the maps that I have is that there's too many head glitches and there's too many close corners. The maps aren't open enough, in my opinion. You take a map like, London Docks, for example, or let's take Ardennes Forest. I think Ardennes Forest is a perfect example of this. So Ardennes Forest, by the base of it, is really good. It's a 3-lane map. It's relatively big. It's relatively flat. There's not a ton of buildings or corners or anything like that. But here's the problem with Ardennes. Let's take the 3 lanes. So the bunker lane, for example, that's a good lane. That's a relatively open lane. It's long. You have long sights of range and all that, and I think that's a good lane. But take the middle lane on Ardennes, for example. The middle lane is so cluttered with just bullshit, like the fire tank and the truck and there's barrels everywhere, and it's like there's just so many different head glitches and tight corners. Fire cut's a really tight corner, cabin cut's a tight corner. Like there's just there's too many. There's not enough open. It's just not open enough. You take a map like Raid, for example, in Black Ops 2, which is largely regarded as one of the best competitive Call of Duty maps to date. That map's incredibly open. I mean, you can see, there's very few. The only tight corners really are at pillars somewhat, even though pillars you can still see someone all the way from, steps on the other side all the way to first hard point. It's just, Raid is if you compare Raid and Ardennes, I think it's a perfect comparison, an example of what makes Raid a better map. It's just more open. It's more open. It's a better designed map. Because there's just not as much clutter. There's not as much clutter in Raid. The outer 2 lanes are very open, and even the middle lane's open. So I think that's a key difference in the World War II competitive maps and the Black Ops 2 competitive maps, is just that they're just not open enough. There's too many tight corners and too many head glitches, in my opinion. But with that said, I will say that I think people over-exaggerate how bad the maps are. Like I said, the only truly horrible map, in my opinion, is Gibraltar Hardpoint. I think all the other maps play relatively well. London Docks was pretty rough there before they updated it and changed the CTF, flag positions. And from what I've watched so far post-patch, London Docks has improved significantly in terms of CTF. We're not seeing as many freaking 9-5 games or all these ridiculously high-scoring games. I still need more time with it. I think we still need more time with it to see how it plays out. But initially, I think it's improved a lot with the changes they made to that maps for CTF. And then, like I touched on earlier, St. Marie S&D, I think, is back to how it kind of should be for just how S&D is supposed to work. Defense is just supposed to be favored. That's how it's supposed to go. And offense was so heavily favored pre-patch due to the spawns. I still don't think St. Marie's a great map for S&D because that B-bomb is really tough to break, nearly impossible to break if you get it down. But it's still, I think St. Marie is significantly better now with the post-patch update changing the spawns. So with that said, let's jump into the next World War II competitive COD topic I want to touch on. That is gun balance. Gun balance, like most of us know, is incredibly, incredibly important in having a good, not just competitive Call of Duty, but just a good Call of Duty in general. You need gun balance. Overpowered guns are not good. They're just not good for the game. And I think Sledgehammer has been pretty controversial in how they've tweaked guns and balanced them and, whose input they've been listening to. I know the pub community thinks that, they only listen to pros and this and that. And, I think the gun balance in this game right now is not great. It's unfortunate that it's kind of reverted back to a 2-gun meta. I'm interested to see how the gun meta continues to shift. I'm hoping that, I know the pros hate the FG42. They think it's an overpowered, easy gun to use. And to be honest, I kind of tend to agree, but I will say that I think the pros are overlooking certain guns. I don't think, for example, I think the pros seem pretty reluctant to try guns out, to try new guns out, to try different guns out. And I think the STG still has a place in competitive Call of Duty. That gun is really good in certain situations on certain maps. I think the STG, for example, is great for a map like London Docks, because London Docks is a pretty fast-paced, smaller map that, I think suits the STG well, if not even better than the FG42, because it's a higher fire rate gun, obviously, and it's going to do better in a lot of scenarios, in a lot of different situations on a map like London Docks as opposed to the FG. So I think I would like to see pros. I think another example would be the Thompson. I don't see why the pros aren't even trying out the Thompson on certain hills, like on the first hill on St. Marie Hardpoint. Why not even try it? That gun is gonna dominate the PPSH at extreme close range because of the fire rate. I don't really understand why I haven't seen more creativity from the pros. Another example would be shotguns. Why not try out the shotgun on first Hardpoint on St. Marie? Why not try it out on Bunker Hill and Ardennes? So I think that it's unfortunate that we've reverted back to a two-gun meta, but I think that there's room for more guns to be added into the meta if the pros would just at least try them out and experiment. I know and I know I'm no pro, I'm not saying I am, but, I've played a lot of ranked play in this game, and I test out guns. I use the STG and the Thompson and the shotgun in certain situations all the time, and it's successful because those guns are better than the PPSH and the FG in plenty of different situations. So, I think that the current gun meta is not great, but I think there is room for improvement. And, I'm interested to see where it goes. So I think that there's room for improvement, no doubt, but Sledgehammer needs to do, it's a tough one, because I think that right now, from a pub standpoint, I think the guns are relatively balanced. And that's another thing I guess I wanted to bring up, is that, people always talk about how bad the gun balance in this game is, but I don't really understand this, because in virtually every COD, it's been primarily a two-gun meta. In virtually every competitive COD, dating all the way back to, MW2. Everyone, you look at, even in Black Ops 2, and Black Ops 2 was largely a two-gun meta. Let's be honest. People like to say, oh, no, the Scorpion was used, and then the, AN-94 was used, and this and that. And it's like, yeah, that's true to a certain extent, but, it was largely the M8 and MSMC. It largely was. You go down the list, you go back and watch Black Ops 2 competition, and that game was still largely a two-gun meta. And I don't think that, I think it is important to have diversity in guns in competitive, because I think that would help attract casuals. I think that one of the biggest turnoffs for some reason I hear from casuals is that, they only use two guns and this and that. And, I think that it would be nice to have a more diverse meta, but I don't think it's the end of the world. I think that, there's room for improvement, but I think that we have bigger issues facing us in terms of just this game in general. So with that said, guys, this is going to conclude the first episode of COD Talks. Like I said, please leave me some constructive feedback. I'm really trying to do my best to make this podcast as best as possible. Like I said, I am very passionate about competitive Call of Duty, and I could talk about this stuff for days. And I'm really looking to try and consistently improve this podcast as much as I can going forward. So with that said, guys, thanks for listening, and I will see you next week. Hopefully, I think for now I'm going to keep this podcast on a weekly schedule. I think I'm going to try and get one released every Friday. That's kind of my goal for now. Hopefully it can develop into more of a daily type podcast, but for now, I'm going to leave it at a weekly podcast. So with that said, guys, thanks for tuning in, and next week's episode will be coming not this Friday, but the next Friday. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and I will see you guys next week.